Welcome to Belated Tech Musings. As part of our series of shorts and episodes on the revolutionary American company SpaceX, we're going to take a look at where SpaceX operates, and where they're going to deliver the next generation of spacecraft into orbit and beyond. From SpaceX's incredibly humble beginnings as a warehouse and a dream in 2006, to the owner of facilities that rival that of NASA and the U.S. Air Force, SpaceX harkens back to a headier time when the U.S. space program was in its infancy in the 1950s and 1960s, and new milestones were set every month and new discoveries are made every year. SpaceX represents the very apex of achievement by an American tech company. Founded by a South African immigrant, funded by Silicon Valley venture capital, staffed by a polyglot of employees and contractors, and blessed with an unusually minimal interference from NASA and the U.S. military, the company has done more for U.S. space development than U.S. government has done in 5 decades since the Apollo 11 moon landing. After our usual highlight reel of prior BTM episodes, let's see where SpaceX began and still is headquartered, and follow a trail of successive company locations that will eventually lead us to SpaceX's Spaceport of Tomorrow. Space exploration technologies got its start after Elon Musk was unable to source rockets from Russia in 2001 to provide a launch vehicle for an experimental Mars biology laboratory. Started in an El Segundo warehouse in 2002, the ability of the company to sell NASA on the idea of commercial spacecraft with cheaper launch numbers than the venerable space shuttle meant that SpaceX needed much larger research and development working areas. Musk found that space in an industrial park in Hawthorne, California, on the grounds of the Hawthorne Municipal Airport. In a pattern that was to be repeated over and over again by Musk companies in the future, SpaceX took over an abandoned Northrop aircraft facility that got its start designing and building fighters and bombers for World War II and ended its service life as a subcontract fuselage assembly plant for Boeing 747 commercial aircraft. SpaceX renovated the main building and began assembling Falcon 1 and eventually Falcon 9 rocket components. Other than the fact that Musk's electric vehicle manufacturer Tesla is based there, Los Angeles County offers an advantage in that employers can draw on one of the largest concentrations of aerospace workers in the U.S. As of 2020, SpaceX employs in excess of 6,000 in the U.S., over half of which are in the Hawthorne campus and the surrounding area. Hawthorne and Los Angeles, California were great for sourcing aerospace engineers and fabricators, but not so great for test firing rocket engines. In fact, California in general is unsuitable for just about anything being developed that can't be stuffed into an office building and makes as little noise as possible, which is why the same World War II era facilities and abandoned automobile plants get used over and over again. This ruled out many other states as well, where environmental lawyers were likely to sue you for endangering rare mosquitoes, and enraged neighbors would sue over the prospect of close proximity industrial activity, or ditching any logical pretense, opportunists would just sue to get attention for themselves. Northern states of course have climates unsuitable for rocket testing, which largely leaves southern states and Florida as candidates. SpaceX settled on Texas for its rocket testing facility, specifically the city of McGregor, a small borough located in the geographic triangle formed by Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio. The state has always been eager to diversify from its energy and chemical manufacturing industrial base, and the state has been home to NASA's mission control facilities since the agency's inception. The McGregor facility only performs fixed-stand rocket tests. as the city does not allow rocket launches. Even so, vibration from the tests are a pervasive feature of living in McGregor and even some surrounding locales, throwing some shade over the benefits of having a large employer in an area that badly needed one, as well as the pride of hosting a company at the forefront of space development. The facility has been a success from a technical standpoint, but how long McGregor will function as SpaceX's headquarters for rocket engineering is anyone's guess. Changing demographics in the McGregor area may be enough to shift the delicate political balance between economic benefits and quality of life, and adjoining states are eager to steal away SpaceX's business from Texas. The Falcon 1 rocket, SpaceX's first launch vehicle developed between 2006 and 2009, was exclusively launched from Omelek Island, part of an atoll that makes up the U.S. Army's Ronald Reagan Ballistic Missile Defense Test Site, an area leased from the Marshall Islands, about 2,100 nautical miles from Hawaii. The Omelek launch site served for 5 Falcon 1 launches, but was removed from the SpaceX launch rotation when the Falcon 1 was itself retired in favor of the Falcon 9 rocket. Musk really wanted to use Vandenberg Air Force Base for SpaceX launches due to its proximity to LA, but the Air Force was still launching Titan rockets for space payload requirements from the base and could not squeeze SpaceX into its schedule. This was to change in 2007 with the retirement of the Titan IV rocket, but the Air Force released a different Titan space launch complex to SpaceX first before the one in Vandenberg, Space Launch Complex 40 in Cape Canaveral, Florida. Used for about 24 launches between 1965 and 2005, the Air Force decommissioned the Titan rocket from service in favor of other options, thereby making the Space Launch Complex 40 surplus. Musk's company signed a lease from the Air Force, demolished the obsolete Titan gantry, and refurbished the site for the Falcon 9, beginning launches in 2010 after an extensive 18-month preparation. Cape Canaveral's most obvious advantage is its remoteness from civilian property owners that could interfere with SpaceX's launch and engineering priorities. Being on the opposite side of the continent from SpaceX's Hawthorne, California headquarters is not exactly handy, however, forcing the company to build and house significant assembly and engineering facilities to accommodate the Canaveral site. This significant investment in physical plant led Musk to decide later to further expand launch capability at Cape Canaveral. With the success of Launch Complex 40 and the end of the Titan rocket, the Air Force suddenly found itself with launch pads at Vandenberg without tenants. After years of stonewalling SpaceX on the use of launch pads at the sprawling California base, the Air Force signaled to SpaceX that it was finally ready to accommodate the commercial space outfit. SpaceX agreed to lease terms, and in 2011, as it did at Launch Complex 40, tore down the Titan gantry. The company refurbished the site for Falcon 9 launches over the next 18 months, and in 2013 began missions. The majority of launches over the next 6 years centered on the launch of replacement satellites for the telecommunications company Inmarsat, with the final installment of Inmarsat satellites occurring in 2019. SpaceX's future plans for Launch Complex 4 are sparing, with just a few commercial launches planned over the next 2 years. SpaceX realized that it needed to launch more rockets in any given 12-month window than it had usable launching pads to accommodate those launches, so it began to explore the available alternatives. The significant investment at Cape Canaveral's Launch Complex 40, coupled with the difficulty in scheduling launches at Launch Complex 4 in Vandenberg, made it only natural to gaze up and down the Florida coast for a solution. That solution was to be found in the Kennedy Space Center, conveniently located just north on a surface road from the Air Force's Space Launch Complex 40, was NASA's Space Launch Complex 39A. SLC 39A had deep historical significance to the U.S. space program as the site of the Apollo and Space Shuttle launches for 4 decades. but the retirement of those programs and its replacement by the oft-delayed Boeing-led Space Launch System meant that the Kennedy Space Center was vastly underutilized.
NASA has just decided to abandon one of the most historic structures in America, the launch pad where the first journey to the moon began. Launch Complex 39A was also the starting point for many shuttle flights.
The launch pad was to be used for NASA's planned super rocket, but now those future launches will be limited to Pad 39B, the other former shuttle and Apollo launch pads. So the future of this pad, where Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins set sail on Apollo 11, may be to do nothing but rust, until nothing is left but the echoes.
SpaceX's interest in a third launch pad meant that NASA could do what it didn't have the money to do: refurbish Launch Complex 39A. A 20-year lease deal was struck between the two parties, and SpaceX began refurbishment of the site in 2013. 4 years later, SpaceX began Falcon 9 launches from 39A, and in 2018, SpaceX launched the Falcon Heavy rocket on its maiden flight. A second Falcon Heavy flight was undertaken in 2019. With a substantial investment in Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy rockets, and a commercial interest in turning a profit, it was only natural that SpaceX looked for ways to leverage its technology. That search resulted in the commissioning of the Starlink satellite broadband internet backbone system. Rather than a few immense communication satellites as had been tried before, Musk conceived of thousands of microsatellites dynamically linked in orbit, providing intercontinental broadband coverage that would rival undersea cable and ground station microwave systems. The engineering required for such a system was immense, and there was no better place for satellite engineers than Boeing's stomping grounds in the Seattle, Washington metropolitan area. So SpaceX leased an office building in Redmond, Washington to house all those engineers and fabricators. As of the filming of this video, the Starlink program is well on its way with 300 satellites in orbit out of an initially planned 1,600, with 12,000 satellites eventually envisioned to provide global coverage. The inconvenience of having engineering located in Hawthorne, California, and launch facilities at long distances led to SpaceX to consider additional local assembly and subsequent shipping via the Panama Canal. Thus, in 2018, SpaceX negotiated with the Port of Los Angeles for a lease on Berth 240, the site of a defunct Bethlehem Steel facility. Following a successful conclusion of lease terms, SpaceX applied for permits to refurbish Berth 240 as a rocket and spacecraft assembly plant and received approval for those plans in 2019.
In late 2015, we were approached by SpaceX for some land to build rockets. And the rockets were going to be very large, which would not allow them to move them the traditional way, which is by truck to their launch pad. Therefore, they needed property with water access. We identified a 19-acre parcel that was sitting fallow since 2005 that once homed the Southwest Marine Shipyard.
So the first aspect of this project, of course, is our lease negotiations, and then we're going to go into the building phase of this project. It's an 80,000-foot building that's 80 feet tall with no columns on the inside of the building. It's a big hangar. And when we add on to it, it'll wind up being a total of a 200,000 square foot building. I drove all around the place, and I found this property, and I looked at it, and that was like the perfect spot for us.
We drive the economy, and most of the stuff we focus on are the industries and the growth of today. But we also have to plant the seeds for tomorrow, so we are bringing SpaceX to the Port of Los Angeles.
Having been in this industry now 28 years, I know that access to space is hard, but it's critical to not just our industry, but to the nation as a whole. I also say the project solidifies our role as a spaceport. I've talked about that before when we were offloading Falcon 9 out of 22nd Street. Pretty exciting. Puts us on the map as a contributor to the exploration of the final frontier that is space. And I think it is an amazing opportunity for all of us to say we are part of it.
SpaceX lands at the Port of LA after a unanimous vote by the City Council to lease land for a new facility. It will be aerospace research, design, and manufacturing site on Terminal Island. This new deal leases the space for almost $2 million a year for 10 years. The company plans to staff 130 engineering jobs plus construction work, estimated to include about 700 other jobs.
Limitations on SpaceX's ability to engage in robust testing at its McGregor, Texas rocket engine facility led Musk to look for a backup. That backup manifested itself in the state of New Mexico's Spaceport America complex. Situated next to the U.S. Army's White Sands Missile Range and 90 miles north of El Paso, Spaceport America offered ideal isolation from civilian areas, along with the ability of being able to test both rocket engines and even launch spacecraft from the complex.
Major developments out of Spaceport America. The southern New Mexico futuristic airport will not only host space travelers. Today we learned a new high-tech rocket company will soon call the spaceport home, a company working to revolutionize the industry. Space Exploration Technologies, or SpaceX, will move from Texas to New Mexico's spaceport to continue testing its rocket called the Grasshopper.
They can go to a higher altitude here than they can at the launch area in Texas per FAA regulations.
The Grasshopper could change the space industry. The reusable rocket comes back down to Earth safely after launching, ready to be used again in the future.
Tremendously bring the cost down of launch for the whole industry. I mean, if they pull this off.
SpaceX was founded by Elon Musk, the same man who promised to bring the Tesla car company to Albuquerque back in 2007, but then bolted after California offered better incentives. But the Spaceport executive director says SpaceX will be here next fall or early winter. They've signed a 3-year agreement. It's not known yet how many New Mexicans the company will employ.
I'm expecting them, and they're expecting to be here, and again, we're very thrilled to have them here.
SpaceX joins Virgin Galactic, the Spaceport's anchor tenant. With 2 major businesses calling the spaceport home, Governor Susana Martinez says the spaceport's future is looking bright.
Because of the unique airspace, many other spaceport kind of industries are going to start coming to New Mexico. So having a second tenant is great. We're out there constantly pushing for more and more tenants to come to Spaceport America.
Spaceport America's remoteness offers drawbacks as well. Namely, its long distance from any seaport and SpaceX's scattered facilities. That means rocket sections have to be either trucked in from Hawthorne or McGregor, something not practical for larger spacecraft such as Starship, or built on site. Licensing flexibility at McGregor, Texas, and new engineering facilities built at Cape Canaveral has meant that SpaceX has had limited activity in New Mexico. Other than the construction of a small launch pad and the signing of a short-term lease, SpaceX has shown little interest in Spaceport America. Nevertheless, as overall activity at SpaceX continues to grow, the limited number of practical launch and testing sites in the U.S. will no doubt keep Spaceport America as a legitimate alternative. With SpaceX signing long-term leases on 3 major launch pads, one would think they would be set for any sequence of launches in the conceivable future. Unfortunately, the reality is quite different. The Air Force has considerable sway over the use of its facilities at Cape Canaveral and Vandenberg, and is understandably focused on its own space priorities. NASA has considerable sway over the use of its facilities at the Kennedy Space Center, and is understandably focused on its own space priorities. The U.S. Army's proximity to Spaceport America via White Sands and its ownership of the Omelek Island launch facilities means that even those facilities, unlikely as it is that SpaceX uses them in the near future, are not at the beck and call of SpaceX. That reality has meant that Musk has been seeking a location for a privately owned spaceport from which it can launch its own Moon and Mars missions, as well as any commercial missions which are more advantageous to launch at other than a U.S. government-influenced facility. That search culminated in the selection of Boca Chica, Texas, a seashore area close to Brownsville and Corpus Christi, as SpaceX's first wholly owned spaceport and the future launching site of Starship. Other than engineering prototypes of the Starship and minor buildings, the Boca Chica spaceport is largely incomplete. Time has been spent testing Starship components and obtaining FAA certification for the site, working with the state of Texas for closure authority over state beaches during launches, and obtaining more land around the site and in the village of Boca Chica itself. Eventually, Musk and SpaceX envisioned the Boca Chica spaceport looking like the simulation they released in 2019. There is no definitive date for either the completion of the spaceport or the first launch of Starship from it, but based on the progress being made on the prototypes, it seems unlikely that the first unmanned flight would occur before 2022. Manned flights seem unlikely to commence before 2025, but this is just speculation. Musk has shown time and again an uncanny knack for beating expectations. We look forward to him doing so again. We hope you enjoyed this briefing on SpaceX locations and their Spaceport of Tomorrow. If so, click that like button. Let us know that you want more of these types of episodes by clicking on the subscribe button. Activating the bell icon will also make sure that you receive notifications of new episodes. Links to material related to this video, the BTM channel, and select previous episodes can be found below. Save the link to our Instagram account so you can get early updates to our channel. Be sure to follow us on Twitter, where we announce all new episodes. Thanks for watching.